Why did I make this video? I was approached by hundreds of people who had questions about various aspects of Islam and its founder Muhammad. While this faith had its share of controversies in the recent years, it is still demonized by many and understood by even fewer. So, after receiving a lot of requests on social media from people who wanted to know the truth about Islamic teachings, I decided to conduct independent research and gathered information from renowned scholars to find out the actual events in the light of modern and ancient history. As much as many of us want to avoid religious topics and theological discussions, as it understandably pushes some out of their comfort zones, misunderstanding others' faith and religion often causes bitter dissent and even violent brawls to outright war. It is no secret that the Crusades was a dark stain on the Christian history of Europe, and many people were quick to blame Christianity for inciting violence, as in this century, the same is often said about Islam. Men and women with shallow knowledge of religious scriptures and laws often rush to draw conclusions after reading unverified texts and passages taken out of context. For instance, churchgoers sometimes hear biblical verses that advise fornicators to be put to death. The passages in the Bible which appear to glorify killing and quote Jesus to be promoting slavery, or the Old Testament verse that commands people to stone women who commit fornication, are often taken out of context in order to depict Judaism and Christianity in a negative way. The same is also done with Islam, and as such, some distorted images are publicized in the media under the guise of objective reporting. It is possible the mention of slavery in the Bible is not meant in literal form. Or perhaps stoning women for adultery was merely suggested in the laws of Moses and may not have been strictly commanded. What purpose does religion serve? All men and women are creation of one God, and regardless of religion, race or culture, religion serves to increase affection, love and kindness among us. Religions offer a way to expand on the idea of brotherhood and friendship, and Islam, like the other monotheistic religions like Judaism and Christianity, call upon people to worship the God of Abraham and live peacefully with one another. However, this message of love and peace is often distorted by some who run misinformation campaign and propaganda online that can confuse the honest seeker of knowledge and facts. It is necessary sometimes to address the facts so that people of various backgrounds can judge for themselves what the truth is, rather than being misled into believing in some false propaganda and be coaxed to hate certain religion, sect or race. Despising others blindly can serve no purpose except to augment one's own unhappiness. It is up to us to use religion as a mean to expand the unification of humankind and spread kindness and love to every man, woman and children. All of us are in the eyes of the one God, who does not discriminate between any religion, race or gender. I elected to make this video, mostly to post historical facts accurately and to put an end to the misinformation that plagues the media. This persistent misinformation is dangerous because it turns one man against another, makes one race hate another, brews anger, and eventually leads nations across the world into harsh warfare. Islam is the most misinterpreted religion in the world, particularly because of historical inaccuracies that have been spreading for a long time. Arabs in pre-Islamic Arabia would often spread false information about Muhammad and his followers, and some of those stories inadvertently ended up becoming parts of religious booklets, and those false accounts were even adopted by some Muslim scholars who thought those to be authentic prophetic narrations.
Hence, in order to understand the Islamic religion, it is necessary to study only the Quran, as this has never been altered in any way. Unfortunately, since many of the followers of Islam also believe in the false propaganda, I made this video after considerable discussions with archaeologists and historians as well as Muslim scholars who pointed out to me the numerous inconsistencies in many theological books. I aim to discuss an aspect of Islam that has been grossly misunderstood, and that is slavery of fellow man. Recent media attention on the idea of sex slavery raised many questions about this subject. Is slavery legal in Islam? What did Muslim prophet Muhammad have to say on the topic of slavery? Few people concern themselves with approaching the religious texts with an open mind or studying the holy books objectively, but content themselves with their own, often biased, interpretation of the faith. In this brief video, we will attempt to go over a few of the most controversial and least understood topics in Islam. 1,450 years ago, when Islam came on the scene, it nullified and negated the concept of slavery. No ruler or progenitor was allowed to treat his subjects or offspring as his slaves. Every individual was bestowed with well-defined rights. The ruler and the ruled, the progenitor and the offspring had to live within the limits prescribed by religion. No one could transgress those limits. Islam was the first religion to name every man and woman equal in the sight of God. Everyone was born free.
There was no slavery system in Islam until pagans started taking Muslims as slaves. Those Muslims who were not protected by powerful tribes were captured and sold to enemies who killed, tortured and persecuted them mercilessly. Finally, God allowed Muslims to take captives only in wars, and that too under complex rules, which included that prisoners of war must be treated gently, and must be fed the same foods his captors ate, must be clothed in the same fabric, and lodged in a similar housing. And it drastically restricted war by allowing imprisonment only in a war that was being fought against an unbelieving and unjust enemy. In no other way could anyone be enslaved. At the same time, Islam raised the status of slavery to that of a free man, and opened many ways for their emancipation. In Islam, no one was permitted to have sexual relations with their slaves. However, in countries throughout Europe, North America and Australia, it was a commonplace occurrence and also sanctioned by government laws to sexually assault their slaves, especially the women, which was practiced in a mass scale and completely legal until a few decades and century ago. However, many people who are poorly versed in matters of Quran often cite a verse of the Quran to justify their false belief that unwed relationships with slaves is permitted in Islam. This assumption is unwarranted and completely baseless. Not a single verse in Quran mentions that unwed relationships with anyone, be they free men or free women, prisoner men or prisoner women, is remotely permitted. The word ama, which means female slave, or the word abd, which means male slaves, are not mentioned anywhere in the Quran as to legalize sexual relations with them.
However, the word malakat aymanukum mentioned in several verses alongside the phrase azwaj, which means wife. According to some scholars, the word malakat aymanukum meant the female prisoners among your wives. This verse was emphasizing the point that in order to marry a free woman, a man had to pay a certain amount of dowry to make sexual relation permissible with her. But in case of female prisoners, upon marriage and consummation of the union, which could be ascertained with the birth of a child, the prisoner was pronounced to be free, and hence emancipation was considered. The dowry and monetary gifts were not required. Marriage was freedom and freedom was dowry, in case of female prisoners. One of the questions that arises often is, where did this religion come from? Islam is a monotheistic religion that calls on believers to worship the Lord of Abraham, Moses and Jesus. Muslims believe that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the national God of the Israelites who delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, is also the God of Muhammad. While Judaism often refers to this one God as Eloah, Muslims have over 99 names for God, including Elah and Allah. The same God who granted Jews the law of Moses at biblical Mount Sinai and revealed Torah to Prophet Moses, and the New Testament to Prophet Jesus, is the one God who revealed the Final Testament, or the Quran, to Muhammad, who Muslims consider to be last of all the prophets. So, who was Muhammad? The Islamic religion was founded by a man named Muhammad, who was a shepherd in his youth. Muhammad is arguably one of the most controversial icons of the modern world, not least because there has been little historical research done on his persona.
Since he was a young man, Muhammad was known as the most truthful person in Mecca. From before his prophethood, he believed in the God of Abraham and shunned idol worship. He never spoke a lie even as a joke. Muhammad lived by a unique set of morals, and in his entire life, he did not kill one human being even in war when he was attacked and tortured fiercely. So, what was Arabia like before Muhammad taught the pagan desert inhabitants to worship the God of Abraham and give up idolatry? Arabia was less than civilized when Muhammad was a young man. Rampant murders, tribal feuds, illicit relationships, indiscriminate slavery and mass plundering was the norm. Even prior to becoming a prophet, Muhammad abhorred such practices and encouraged others to be charitable. Following the advent of his prophethood, Muhammad gave women equal rights in a time when women were nothing but the property of men. Muhammad taught people the covenants of Islam, which gave women the right to buy and sell without hindrance, own businesses, and express her views politically. These were all basic rights which the American and European woman was not granted until relatively recently. Muhammad also encouraged women to study and learn Islamic and scientific knowledge, breaking a ban which several religions had stipulated that forbid women from acquiring any religious knowledge or touch religious texts. It also abolished the practice of marrying a woman without her consent. Thus, many historians suggest that by bringing forth Islam, the Prophet Muhammad was women's first liberator in 6th century Arabia. While many people around the world are misinformed about Muhammad's lifestyle and characteristics, others have given him the due credit for the many changes he brought about. After his prophethood, Muhammad was granted the Quran, a scripture which had never been changed in the last 1400 years. Muslims believe the Quran is undoubtedly from a supreme and spiritual being because the scientific facts that are stated in the Quran are in no way possible for man to have known 14 centuries ago. The Book of Islam, regardless of what subject it refers to, has often been proven as God's word as each new piece of historical, scientific or archaeological information comes to light. Facts about scientific subjects and the news delivered to us about the past and future, facts that no human being could have known at the time of the Quran's revelation, are announced in its verses. It is impossible for this information to have been known with the level of knowledge and technology available in 7th century Arabia. In chapter 4 of the Quran, God informs people, if it, the Quran, had been from other than Allah, they would have found many inconsistencies in it. Quran, verse 82 of chapter 4, this verse was meant to highlight that Muhammad, who was an ordinary human, couldn't have known those scientific facts back then which only modern science is being able to prove now. Muhammad loved animals and was especially fond of both cats and dogs. He entreated the Bedouin Arabs to treat their camels gently. Dogs were also considered to be valued creations of God and held a very high position in the Quran, as is mentioned in chapter Kahf. Muhammad opposed animal cruelty and severely reprimanded cattle owners who mistreated their herds. He never ordered to kill a single dog or cat in his entire lifetime. Despite his idealized vision for peace and stability, the pagan Arabs of Mecca were outraged by his demands. Muhammad was tortured mercilessly by pagans when he began to preach the teachings of Islam, but he never retaliated and was eventually forced to flee to nearby city of Medina. When Prophet Muhammad took over Mecca a decade later, he never took revenge against any one of his former oppressors. Muhammad continued preaching Islam to those vanquished Meccans and offered them utmost mercy and freedom, which included granting liberty especially to women and slaves, who were oppressed mercilessly by the pagan Romans and the French. Women in those societies neither had the right to inherit nor had the right to marry on her own, or buy or sell or own any property at the pre-Islamic period. Muhammad therefore announced that men had equal position in the eyes of God, and he gave them the right to inherit, buy, sell, and marry on their own. The attempt to introduce greater sexual equality to religion did not produce great results in the past, partially because some men hijacked the faith and dragged it back to the old patriarchy. This happened in both Christianity and Islam, latter-day reassertions of axial age monotheism. The Prophet Muhammad, for example, was anxious to emancipate women, and they were among his first converts. In 7th century Arabia, the Quran taught people that men and women had exactly the same responsibilities and duties, and gave women rights of inheritance and divorce that we would not enjoy in the West until the 19th century. Muhammad's inherent desire to instill civil behavior into his countrymen drove him to the streets. For days, he would traverse the desert hills and entreat his fellow Arabs to enjoin kindness and equality. He urged them to free their slaves and deal mercifully with women and children. Muhammad encouraged the wealthy Arab merchants to give charity to the poor and orphans. But the pagan Arabs were infuriated by his claims that women and men should enjoy equal rights. This caused them to torture and persecute him endlessly. One of his staunch persecutors was his own uncle and his cousin. For 3 years, his fellow Meccans and other dominant tribes levied a ban on trade with Muhammad's family and followers, and subjected them to near-famine conditions. In this sanction, Muhammad's wife and uncle both died, but Muhammad survived the ordeal. The pagan leaders of Mecca then attempted to assassinate Muhammad, but he fled Mecca at nightfall and escaped to the city of Medina. Why were the people who call themselves Arab today torturing and killing Muhammad and his family 14 centuries ago? It was because he enjoined others to do acts of charity and free the slaves and respect the womenfolk. His crime was he wanted to give women more rights than men. He banned murder and called for an end to tribal feuds, in which wealthy families got away by killing poor or less distinguished people. They resented the fact that he abolished slavery and stipulated that prisoners of war could be taken in the aftermath of a combat, but must be freed upon the payment of ransom. He would remain in near-starvation rations to ensure the prisoners of war were fed adequately. The endless persecution became unbearable for Muhammad and his followers. And only after a Christian king in Africa offered him and the Muslims shelter in his country did the believers get some respite for a few days. Islam is the first religion which allowed a free woman to marry a slave man, as well as allowed a free man to marry slave women. After Muslims were allowed to take prisoners of war, which was commonly referred to as slaves at that time, persecution against Muslims declined because pagans realized that their warriors would be imprisoned if they fought against Muslims or took free-born Muslims as slaves unjustly. Thus, a new chapter unfolded, providing some equality and compensation for the believing men and women. As for male prisoners of war, since they were physically able to work, they were required to earn their bail money and free themselves. However, rich male and female prisoners were immediately set free on bail with money which was paid by their wealthy relatives. Before slave trade was started on a large scale by the Westerners, when colonization began, it was only in wars that men were made captives. But Islam did not permit wars of aggression. All the battles fought during the lifetime of the Prophet were defensive battles. Not only this, an alternative was also introduced and enforced. To let the captives go free, either with or without any ransom, the Quran 47:4. In the battles forced upon the Muslims, the Prophet had ordered very humane treatment of the prisoners who fell into Muslim hands. They could purchase their freedom on payment of small sums of money, and some of them were left off without any payment. It all depended upon the discretion of the Prophet or his rightful successors, keeping in view the safety of the Muslims and the extent of danger from the enemy. The captives of the very first Islamic battle, Badr, were freed on ransom, in form of money or work, like teaching 10 Muslim children how to read and write, while those of the tribe of Tay were freed without any ransom. Even in such enslavement a condition was attached that a mother was not to be separated from her child, nor brother from brother, nor husband from wife, nor one member of a clan from his clan. The Prophet and the fourth Caliph of Islam, Ali bin Abi Talib, prescribed severest penalties for anyone who took a free man into slavery. On top of everything, Islam has given generous rights to both women and men. Women are often granted more privilege than men, and children more privilege than women. The weaker someone is physically, the more rights Islam gives them. The concept that Islam gives women any less rights than men are completely wrong and inaccurate, unfounded, unjust, and grossly ill-informed. The life of women in the pre-Islamic period, when female infanticide was the norm and when women had no rights at all, were no better treated than livestock. Like slaves, women were treated as an inferior species who had no legal existence. In such a primitive world, what Muhammad achieved for women was extraordinary. The very idea that a woman could be... In fact, during the many centuries that followed Prophet Muhammad, women of the Islamic society had much higher social position than the non-Muslim women of that time. During the Middle Ages, the Muslims were horrified to see the way Westerners treated their women in Europe and the Crusader states, and the European government and Christian scholars denounced Islam for giving too much powers to menials like women and slaves. Islam first gave women their rights in a time when women were nothing but the property of men. Islam gave women the right to buy and sell on their own business, and express views politically. These were all the basic rights which the American woman was not granted until recently. Islam encouraged women to study and learn Islamic knowledge in science and law, breaking a ban which several religions had stipulated, which forbid women to acquire any religious knowledge or even touch religious texts. It also abolished the practice of marrying women without her consent. Islam also made marriage settlement or dowry compulsory for men to give women at the time of marriage. It allowed a woman to demand any amount of money and from her would-be husband in order for the marriage to be legalized. They were allowed to add marriage contracts and could add anything to it as long as it does not go against the Islamic obligatory laws and time limit. After contract marriage, a woman was able to include deals including to stop the man from taking any other wives while being married to her. While other women of that time had no say in marriage, nor own any money before or after marriage, the men used to take innumerable amount of wives with no laws to bound them. Whilst in Islam a woman had the right to earn, spend or keep her money before and after marriage, Islam also allowed married women to spend from their husband's money as if it were their own. However, the husband could not take the money of his wife. Islam gave women innumerable rights in regards to every law. And as for the physical protection of women, Islam gave women the right to cover herself, which were not allowed in other places. Every virtue and every sin are of equal weight in Islam, be they be committed by a man or a woman. Thus, one would have to be very ignorant indeed to refuse that Islam was the first liberator of womankind. Britain and most of Europe in the same period was just recovering from the lengthy Roman occupation, which was followed by the arrival of Christianity. The European society was a highly fragmented one, in which tribal wars and kingly struggles to gain control over the land and people were commonplace. With very few exceptions, women had little or no rights or active role to play in such affairs. As the dawn of Islam was starting to illuminate the long shadow of oppression on women and slaves, the French civilization in the same period, 586 CE, only after Muhammad migrated to Medina and Islam became prevalent, the French were claiming compassion and civility by passing a law and resolution, after great deliberation and controversy, that women can be classified as a human being and not an animal, however she is created for the sole purpose of serving man. Whereas Islam, the unchangeable religion, was, is, and will always be the first religion to declare every human being born to be equal in the eyes of God. So, back to the question of slavery in Islam, well, it seems there was not much to find. There is no slavery in Islam, only prisoners. There is no ransom in Islam, only bail.